Okay, well, hello everyone. Today we are going to go over my first ever full stack application. The first thing we're going to do is look at the technologies that were used. So the backend is a MongoDB database, as well as Express JavaScript to handle all of that backend stuff. The front end is handlebars.js, so that we can push and pull things, and then Sass for the styling. The middleware is just the npm install body parser and npm method override, so that we can do the different methods that we need, and so that handlebars understands the JSON data that we send it from the body parser. So let's take a look first at the app, and then we'll come back to the code here. So we're going to go to localhost 3000. This app is hosted on Heroku, but currently my power is out, so I have no internet. And therefore, I'm going to go to my localhost 3000. This is the main page. It lists all of the users that are attached to this app. The basic idea of this app is to allow the creation of users that can then create different kinds of lists of music albums, maybe favorite albums, favorite rap albums, favorite rock albums, etc., and keep track of all of those lists and all of the albums in those lists specific to each user. So right now, this is just some basic seeded data that I have. If we look at my name, Nathaniel, you can come in here and you can see favorite albums, favorite fast rap albums. I can add a new one to the list. I can delete this user from the application, and also edit maybe favorite genre or my name if I typed it in wrong. So if we take a look at a list is just a list of albums here. I put Rise and Awake here. You can add the album to the list, edit it. If you look at the album, it's just the album and who it's by. So now we can go ahead and come back here to the start. If you click New, pulls you to another page where you can enter a new person in and enter their favorite genre. You could technically put a comma in here and add another genre if you wanted to, and they would come up. So you can create user, come back, it redirects back to the home page, and now we have our new user here. Now they don't have any lists, so let's go ahead and give them a list. Let's say favorite rock albums, since actually let's do favorite metal albums, since we said that his favorite genre was metal music. So let's create that. You can go into that list and go ahead and add album to list. And so we'll say Dark Skies, artist Fit for a King. Okay, and click add album. Goes ahead and redirects back to the start page. That's a bug that I'm working on. The routes just get really gnarly if I don't, so hopefully that'll be fixed in the next iteration of the app. But now we have our Dark Skies albums right here, and it comes up and shows everything. If we were like, wait, nope, that was on the wrong list, we can click delete, come back, and it's gone. So we can go ahead and let's re-add that to the list. Yeah. So then we can add a new list, which I already showed. We can also edit. So maybe his favorite genre isn't metal. Maybe it's, I don't know. Let's say it's rap. Maybe he's a rap guy. If we come in here, it's changed his favorite genre to rap. And maybe we don't really want this whole list anymore because we're not a metalhead. We want to get rid of those. And add a new list and say fave rap albums. That'll create the list. Direct back here. And click that. Add album to list. Let's say he really likes Gravity by Lecrae. That's his favorite. We come in here, and now that's been added to the list. We can also edit the albums themselves and say, oops, it wasn't by, I didn't mean to say Gravity by Lecrae, I meant to say Real Talk by Lecrae, and now that's been updated. So that's kind of the basic functionality of everything. You can populate as many albums as you want in these lists, as well as edit and delete them. So that was the basic functionality of the app. Now let's take a look at some of the code that powers this. So basically how this worked out is we've got three models here, user, list, and album. And the user has a name and a favorite genre, and then it has this guy right here, this array of ID references to lists. And this was kind of the trickiest part of this whole application, because not only does user have an array of references to ID lists, list then also has an array of references to album object IDs. And this is something we kind of went over in the bookmark lab, for those of you that know about that lab before. And so I used a lot of the code from there to kind of get at least this structure down. Album just has the name and the artist. And so that's kind of the basics of the models. If we then go look at my C data here in database, my computer's running very slow today for some reason. So if we go CJS, this kind of took up a whole day to get this working because it's so many nested .thens. But it is now working, which is awesome. And we'll just go ahead and walk through it. So first we just delete all the users, delete all of the lists, and delete all the albums in the database so that we start with a fresh database. We have to do a user.create, not a user.insert, because the user.insert messes some things up and doesn't create the an empty list of references for you. And the return type gets weird as well. So you got to use .create. So we create this person, Nathaniel, favorite genre, hard rock, and we pass that object on to the .then. So Nathaniel is this user object that we created right here. And then we go ahead and create an album called Awake by Skillet, and we pass that album here. I said Rise here in the code because in testing originally this name was Rise and now it's not. My computer seems to have frozen. Ooh, okay. So then we go ahead and do a list.create, and we make that list favorite albums. We give it a name. Then we pass that to this then. So inside of this loop, we have now passed Nathaniel, Rise, and favorite albums are all available in this last then statement. So first thing we do is we push Rise to our favorite albums array. So we go fave albums. This is the name of this list object. So the list object .albums .push Rise. And then we have to do .save. And this is what the line of code that I originally forgot. I only had this .save, and that caused issues of everything running, but nothing showing up because nothing was ever saved. And so then when we got to try to do something with the user, nothing was happening. So we take the .save there, and then we do Nathaniel.lists.push, so the Nathaniel user object we created, .lists.push, the favorite albums list that we just saved here. Save that as well. Just a simple console log to let me know that the seeding is done. Then that gives us all the data that we need. And so now we can talk about the next problem that we ran into, which is if we come over here to controllers. and go to user. So when we want to, the problem with the method that we are doing right now is MongoDB is not technically a relational database by default. So that's why we have to add those manual references in there. Now what that is we said it was a reference to an object ID. So in reality, our database, in our user, if you look at that particular object, which I can actually show here, if we go Mongo, we can go look at our actual database and say use album list, show collections, and say db.users.find. So if you look at what our user data is, we look at our lists, right? Our lists are just a bunch of object IDs. It's not the actual objects themselves. So it's just saying, hey, it's a reference, here's the ID of the object you're talking about. And so if you try to just use this, all you're going to get in your handlebars when you try to reference one of these lists is just a random ID, and you can't click on it, can't do anything with it, and the user's not going to have any idea what it is. So before you go ahead and render that show user page that I have, what you have to do is you have to do this populate function, this populate execute function. And basically what that does is you have to first user.find one, and you have to put this return in here so that it gets returned to the populate. And you find the particular user that we're looking for. Then it says .populate, and you pass it the name of the property you want populated. So in our case, user has, if we look at the model, it has lists. Is the name of that property, that key. So when you take that, what populate does is it goes and it looks at the array of lists, finds the ID, and then it takes and looks at what we said here, reference list. So that tells the populate method what database to go look in, what collection to go look in for the data that's attached to this object ID. So populate goes into that data, pulls that object ID, and actually replaces the object ID in the array with the actual data of that object, the full object of that list. And so that is how we are able to then pass that user object. It then returns that populated object right here in this execute function as user. And that is what allows us to then pass that on to our show user. And that way we can get the lists.name here in our handlebars. That was one of the major hiccups. Besides the small mistake on the seed data, it took a lot of research to figure out exactly how to use that .populate method. And it's really, really specific about this. What is this called? This has to match with this, and these lists have to be the right titles, and this list right here has to be exactly the same as this list here so that it knows what to look for. I know previous labs you can actually get away with calling the when you do this module export, calling this list something other than what you've referenced here. But in order to get the populate method to work, you really need to have this name be exactly the same as this name. That way the database knows what to look for and the populate method knows what to look for. So that was the major, I guess, jump that we took. The other thing that we discovered in developing this is that Handlebars really doesn't like to work with many of the CSS libraries. And so what we ended up doing in order to get some CSS to render besides putting just some style tags directly into Handlebars is I put these classes. I put show user here on the show user page, show list on the show list, etc., through all of these. And then we came over here in our public folder. We have this style.sass. I'm also using the Watch Sass plugin for VS Code so that it renders it in style CSS. So in here, we have written Sass for each page, specifically by their class. So we put the whole class, made the whole page a class, and this allows us to style the different pages slightly differently. We then have to, on our layout HBS, include this style sheet. Now, Express.js, when it runs, it's almost like a compiler, and it smashes all of the code together because browsers can only render one HTML, one CSS, and one JavaScript file. So we, as coders, break out all of those pieces so that it's easier to see and manage from a coding perspective, but a computer can't manage it that way, so when Express runs, it slams everything together into one file. So that makes these references not work out too well. It kind of blows them up. Unless you come into your index.json and do this line of code, which basically this line of code says, hey, whenever I reference some other file, whenever I'm linking another file, I want you to go ahead and look in the directory name public, and that's why I have this here. And that's where you're going to look for, that's going to be your starting point for looking for the file path that I passed you in my layout HBS. So that's why we don't have to put a public here. We don't have to do the ... to step out and then step in. Simply just go from public, style sheets, style.css, and this CSS is all rendered here. It looks much prettier in Sass. Sass does not is the same as SCSS, which I used on my project 1, except Sass does not use any curly braces. It's all space tab delineated in order to get your functionality. So basically the styling here, background color purple, is for an A tag, which is in the show user class. Just a super simple, easy to read, very clean way of writing the CSS. And then you've got your mapping here to map to the file style.css. And that's where we get all of this. And that is how it is applied. And we get all the different stylings here on the page of the black background and purple. A little bit about the styling. I kind of had a lot of trouble, like I said. Either we were going to maybe use Semantic UI or try to use one of these other libraries, but they don't work with Handlebars, and so we had to go back to Sass. And so for this one, I love dark modes on most applications, and so I thought, let's go ahead and try experimenting with dark mode on my own, and putting the black background and then putting the grays and whites, purples, those kinds of things on top of it. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I think there's definitely some things that could look a little better. This delete button kind of jumps out at me right now, and I'm not sure if I like that delete jumps out or if I don't like it. Love some feedback on that, as well as the other styling and maybe some little tips and tricks on things I could do to make it look a little cleaner. But in regards to this app, I think that's about it on the functionality of it. Thank you for watching and listening. Let me know on GitHub if you want to put some comments there, submit issues or anything, let me know. Future plans for this app, I would like to connect an API. I was looking into the Last.fm API in order that instead of the user having to, when they want to add an album, go ahead and enter the name and the artist all manually, rather have it a search where you can put in the name of the album and search, and it'll populate. It'll give you some options here of which album you want to click, and when you add, that'll give me an easy way so that when you do the show album, it's not just the name and who it's by. Maybe put some album artwork in here as well as a track list. I thought about putting a track list in this base one, but I didn't want the user to have to input every single track from an album. I wanted it to be a little simpler, less typing for them. They can always go and look up on Spotify or whatever they're listening to. This isn't a listening app, it's more just a list tracker app. If they want to listen, they can go and look that album up on Spotify and play it that way. But if I use the Last.fm API, that would allow me to import more data faster without the user having to type all of that data in. So again, thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.